I died in a car accident on December 3rd, 2023, exactly 1 week after signing the divorce papers that left me with $47,000 from a 15-year marriage to a man worth $80 million. I woke up on April 15th, 2023, in my bed in the house I would be evicted from in 8 months, next to the husband who was already sleeping with his secretary. For exactly 17 seconds, I thought I'd had a psychotic break. Then I saw the date on my phone, saw Marcus's face slack with sleep beside me, and felt the weight of my wedding ring, the one I'd pawned for $300 to pay for a motel room after he'd changed the locks, and I understood. I'd been given something impossible, a second chance. Not to save my marriage. That was dead long before the divorce papers. Not even to save myself from the initial heartbreak, because I'd already lived through discovering the affair, already endured the humiliation of finding out everyone knew before I did. No, I'd been given the chance to make sure that this time, when Marcus tried to destroy me, I'd destroy him first. The clock read 6:47 a.m. In my first life, I'd woken at 6:45, made Marcus his coffee, and found the receipt from Cartier in his jacket pocket, a $34,000 necklace I'd never seen. When I'd asked him about it that evening, he'd laughed and said it was for his mother's birthday. His mother's birthday was in February. It was April. This time, I didn't get up. I lay there watching the sunrise paint shadows across the ceiling, and planned. By the time Marcus's alarm went off at 7 o'clock, I had the skeleton of my revenge. By the time he kissed my forehead and told me he'd be late tonight, meeting with investors, he'd say, in reality, fucking Jessica in the apartment he rented under his cousin's name, I had the first 3 moves mapped out. I love you, he said at the door, straightening his tie. I know, I replied. In my first life, I'd set it back. The thing about living your life twice is that you notice things. Small things. The way Marcus's jaw tightened when I mentioned hiring a decorator for the house. The way he steered conversations away from our finances. The way he'd started taking calls in his car, in the garage with the door closed. I'd noticed these things the first time too, but I'd made excuses. He was stressed about work. He valued his privacy. He was protective of me. Didn't want me to worry about money. Bullshit. All of it. Marcus was a venture capitalist who'd made his fortune by being in the right place at the right time, and by marrying me. When we'd met, I was 24, working as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, pulling 80-hour weeks and building models that made the senior partners millions. Marcus was 28, charming, ambitious, and running a startup that was hemorrhaging money. I'd believed in him. More than that, I'd helped him. I'd used my connections to introduce him to investors. I'd spent my evenings reviewing his pitch decks, sharpening his numbers, teaching him how to talk to money. When his startup finally got acquired for $12 million, I had been the one who'd negotiated the terms. We'd gotten married 6 months later. I'd quit my job when he'd asked me to, trusting him when he said we didn't need 2 incomes, that he wanted me to relax, to finally breathe after years of grinding. What he'd really wanted was to make sure I was financially dependent on him before he started hiding assets. In my first life, I didn't figure this out until it was too late. The divorce papers he'd served me had listed his net worth at $8 million. I'd been confused. His firm was managing over $200 million in assets. But my lawyer, the one Marcus had recommended, had told me that was just AUM, assets under management, not his personal wealth. I'd believed him. I'd accepted the settlement, $470,000, which he'd paid out over 5 years at $94,000 per year. Exactly 10% of the $8 million he'd claimed to be worth. I'd signed those papers in a haze of grief and exhaustion, just wanting it to be over. Then I'd spent 6 months in a studio apartment in Queens, applying for jobs, getting ghosted by everyone in my network. Turns out Marcus had poisoned that well thoroughly. And watching my savings evaporate. The car accident had almost been a relief. But now I was back, and this time I knew the truth. Marcus wasn't worth $8 million. He was worth $80 million at least. And I was going to prove it. I started with the obvious, documentation. In my first life, I'd ignored our finances, trusted Marcus to handle everything. This time, I paid attention. Our primary checking account, the one I had access to, showed modest deposits. Marcus's salary from his VC firm, $450,000 a year. Respectable, but not extravagant. But I knew there were other accounts. At least 7 of them, spread across 3 banks, filled with money from exits, carry from successful investments, and consulting fees paid to shell companies Marcus had set up. And I couldn't access those accounts, not yet. But I could document their existence. On April 18th, I did something I'd never done in my first life. I went to Marcus's home office while he was at the gym and photographed everything. Bank statements he'd left in his desk drawer, emails from his accountant about asset protection strategies, a handwritten list of investment vehicles, LLCs, trusts, offshore accounts, with numbers next to them that made my hands shake. I didn't take anything. I just photographed it all on my phone, uploaded it to an encrypted cloud drive, and was back in the kitchen making smoothies by the time he came home. "You're in a good mood," he said, kissing my neck. "Just happy," I replied. It wasn't a lie. I was happy. I was going to ruin him. The affair was predictable. Jessica Chen, 26, his executive assistant, hired 3 months ago in my first timeline, which meant she'd be starting next week in this one. I remembered her, tall, polished, ambitious. She'd been sweet to me at the firm's holiday party, had complimented my dress and asked where I'd gone to school. 2 weeks later, Marcus had started coming home smelling like her perfume. In my first life, I'd confronted him about her in July. He'd denied it, said I was being paranoid, insecure, that the stress of trying to get pregnant was making me irrational. We'd been trying to get pregnant for 2 years. Or rather, I'd been trying. I'd later learned that Marcus had gotten a vasectomy 6 months after our wedding, never told me, and let me blame myself for our inability to conceive. That one still hurt. Even knowing it was coming, even having lived through it once, the memory of those 2 years, the hope, the tests, the disappointment, the way he'd held me while I cried and told me it would happen eventually, made me want to scream. But didn't scream, I planned. On April 24th, the day before Jessica's start date, I went to a law firm in Manhattan. Not the one Marcus would eventually recommend to me, a different one. Rothstein and Associates occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet that came with $1, 200 an hour retainers. I'd found them through research, looking for firms that specialized in high net worth divorces, firms with reputations for being ruthless. The senior partner, David Rothstein, was a legend, 68 years old, semi-retired, and still the lawyer every billionaire's wife called when she wanted to leave with half of everything. I didn't have an appointment. I'd shown up at 4:30 p.m. with a folder full of the documents I'd photographed and a simple request. "I need 15 minutes of your time. I'll pay your consultation fee. If you're not interested after hearing me out, I'll leave." The receptionist had looked skeptical, but she'd made a call, and 5 minutes later I was sitting across from David Rothstein in an office that overlooked Central Park. "Mrs. Sterling," he'd said, folding his hands on his desk, "you have 15 minutes. "My husband is going to serve me with divorce papers in approximately 7 months, I'd said. "He's going to claim his net worth is $8 million. His actual net worth is over $80 million. He has 7 undisclosed accounts, 3 shell companies, and 1 offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. I have documentation. I want to hire you to represent me in the divorce, but I need you to do it quietly. He can't know I've retained counsel until the moment I'm ready." Rothstein had studied me for a long moment. Then he'd smiled. "You have my attention. Keep talking." Over the next 2 hours, I laid it all out. Everything I knew about Marcus's finances, the timeline of the affair, the vasectomy I'd discovered medical records for in his files, the way he'd systematically isolated me from my career and my network. And I told him about the settlement I'd accepted in my first life, $470,000 paid out over 5 years. "He offered you 6% of his actual net worth," Rothstein had said, his expression somewhere between disgusted and impressed. "That's bold." "He got away with it," I'd replied. "The lawyer he recommended to me told me it was a fair settlement given the circumstances." The lawyer he recommended. Rothstein had leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess, Dennis Patterson?" I'd blinked. "How did you know?" "Because Dennis Patterson has been helping rich men hide assets and fuck over their wives for 30 years. He presents himself as a mediator, someone who wants to keep things amicable, and then he guides women into settlements that are a fraction of what they're entitled to. Rothstein had pulled out a legal pad. Marcus is smart, but if you're here, if you have the documentation you say you have, then we're smarter. I need this to be airtight, I'd said. I need him to offer me that same settlement, $470,000. I need to accept it, and then I need you to demolish him in court. Rothstein had raised an eyebrow. Why accept a lowball offer if you know it's coming? Because I want him confident. I want him to think he's won. And then I want to watch his face when he realizes he hasn't. For the first time, Rothstein had laughed. Mrs. Sterling, I think we're going to work well together. The retainer was $50,000. I didn't have $50,000. What I had was a storage unit in Brooklyn with $200,000 in cash that Marcus didn't know about. In my first life, I'd discovered that money by accident after the divorce, when I was cleaning out the unit we'd rented to store furniture from his mother's estate. It had been hidden in a vintage trunk, wrapped in plastic, a stash Marcus had apparently forgotten about. I'd spent it on rent and food and trying to survive. This time, I drove to Brooklyn the next morning, retrieved exactly $50,000, and delivered it to Rothstein's office in a leather bag. I won't ask where this came from, Rothstein had said. Inheritance, I'd replied. His mother had eclectic ideas about banks. It wasn't entirely a lie. The money had come from Marcus's mother's estate. He just didn't know I knew about it. Jessica started on April 25th. I met her at the firm's welcome breakfast, watched Marcus introduce her to the team, saw the way his hand lingered on her lower back for just a second too long. In my first life, I'd gone home and cried. This time, I went home and added a note to my growing file. First physical contact observed 4/25, 9:47 a.m. in front of witnesses. I'd learned something important in my first life. Documentation was everything. Judges didn't care about feelings or suspicions. They cared about proof. So I collected proof. I hired a private investigator, not the one Marcus would eventually hire to follow me and prove I'd abandoned the marriage, but a different one, a woman named Sarah Chen, who came highly recommended by Rothstein. Sarah was expensive, $400 an hour, but she was worth it. Within 2 weeks, she had photos of Marcus and Jessica having lunch at a restaurant in Tribeca. Within 4 weeks, she had photos of them entering the apartment on the Upper East Side. He's not even being careful, Sarah had told me, spreading the photos across my kitchen table while Marcus was at work. He's acting like he's invincible. He thinks he is, I'd replied. He thinks I'm too stupid to notice. Sarah had looked at me with something like pity. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this. Don't be. I'm going to take him for everything he has. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending I didn't know, pretending I still loved him. Pretending I believed him when he said he was working late, traveling for business, too tired for sex. There were moments when I almost broke. Moments when he'd come home smelling like her perfume and I'd want to throw the evidence in his face, to scream at him, to demand answers I already had. But I didn't. I smiled. I kissed him. I asked about his day. And I waited. June 14th was our anniversary. 15 years. In my first life, Marcus had forgotten. This time he remembered because Jessica had probably reminded him. He took me to Daniel, my favorite restaurant, and gave me a Cartier bracelet. I know things have been hard lately, he said, taking my hand across the table. I know I've been working too much, but I love you. I want you to know that. The bracelet was beautiful. Platinum with diamonds. $28,000 according to the receipt I'd find in his jacket later. I wore it every day after that. Not because I liked it, but because I wanted him to see me wearing it when I took him to court. I wanted him to remember this moment, this lie, when I used it as evidence of marital assets he'd have to split. I love you too, I said, and I watched him believe me. The thing about Marcus was that he wasn't just cheating on me with Jessica. He was cheating on his business partners, his investors, everyone who trusted him. I'd learned this in my first life through the lawsuit that had been filed against him 3 months after our divorce was finalized. A group of investors had accused him of misrepresenting the returns on a fund he'd managed, of funneling money into his personal accounts, of running what amounted to a small-scale Ponzi scheme. The lawsuit had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Marcus had walked away unscathed, protected by layers of LLCs and a legal team that made problems disappear. But I remembered the names of those investors, and I remembered the lawyer who'd led the charge against him. On July 3rd, I met with that lawyer, a woman named Patricia Moss, at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. "Why are you telling me this?" she'd asked, after I'd laid out the basics of what Marcus was doing. "Because in 6 months, you're going to file a lawsuit against him, and you're going to settle for pennies. But if you wait, if you coordinate with me, we can both get what we want." Patricia had studied me carefully. "What exactly do you want?" "I want his financial records subpoenaed as part of my divorce proceedings. I want a forensic accountant to go through every account, every investment, every shell company. And I want you to use what we find." That's ambitious. "I have documentation," I'd said, sliding a folder across the table. "Bank statements, emails, a paper trail that proves he's been hiding assets. You help me expose him in divorce court, and I'll hand you everything you need to destroy him in civil court." Patricia had opened the folder, read for 5 minutes, closed it. "I'm in," she'd said. August was brutal. Marcus was barely home, barely present, and when he was irritable, distant. I knew why. He was falling in love with Jessica, and the guilt was making him cruel. He started picking fights. Small things, stupid things. I'd bought the wrong brand of coffee. I'd been too loud on a call with my sister. I'd worn a dress he didn't like to a work event. In my first life, these fights had devastated me. I'd thought I was failing as a wife, that I was losing him, that if I just tried harder, loved him better, everything would be okay. This time, I recorded them. Every fight, every cruel word, every moment of him belittling me. I kept my phone in my pocket, voice recorder running, and I let him rage. "You're pathetic," he'd said one night in late August, after I'd asked him why he'd missed our couple's therapy appointment, an appointment I'd scheduled knowing he wouldn't show. "You've turned into this needy, clingy person I don't even recognize." "I'm sorry," I'd said softly. "I'm just trying to save our marriage." "Maybe it's not worth saving." In my first life, I'd cried myself to sleep after that fight. This time, I'd saved the audio file, backed it up to 3 different drives, and slept like a baby. September 15th, the day I'd been waiting for. Marcus asked me to meet him for lunch at a cafe near his office. I knew what was coming. In my first life, this was the day he'd told me he wanted a divorce. I dressed carefully. Nothing too nice, nothing that would suggest I'd been expecting this. Just jeans and a sweater, minimal makeup. The perfect picture of a woman about to have her world shattered. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking tired and older than his 43 years. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey." He didn't smile, didn't meet my eyes. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course. Is everything okay?" He took a breath. "I need to talk to you about something, about us." Here it was, the moment I'd lived once and would now perform. "What about us?" I kept my voice steady, concerned but not panicked. "I think," he ran a hand through his hair, "I think we need to be honest with ourselves, about where we are, about whether this is still working." "Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we should separate, maybe eventually divorce." I let the silence stretch. Let him see the shock, the hurt, the confusion I genuinely felt the first time. "Is there someone else?" I asked quietly. "No," he said too quickly. "This isn't about anyone else. It's about us. We've grown apart. We want different things." "I want you," I said. And I meant it, in a way. I wanted him exactly where he was. Lying to me, underestimating me, walking straight into the trap I'd spent 5 months building. "I know," he said. And he actually looked sad. "But I don't think I can give you what you need anymore." We separated in October. I moved out of the house, our house, the one I'd decorated, the one where I'd imagined raising children, and into a 1-bedroom apartment in the West Village that Rothstein had helped me find. Marcus paid the rent, of course. He was generous in his guilt, giving me $5,000 a month for living expenses. It was exactly what he'd done in my first life. What he didn't know was that every dollar he gave me went straight into documentation. Receipts, bank statements, proof that he'd maintained me in a certain lifestyle during our marriage and was continuing to do so during the separation. We were supposed to try to work on things during the separation. That was the story Marcus was telling everyone. We just needed space. In reality, he moved Jessica into our house 3 weeks after I left. Sarah got photos. The divorce papers came on November 1st, hand-delivered by a process server while I was having coffee with my sister. I read them in the cafe, my hands shaking. Not with shock this time, but with anticipation. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Marcus was claiming a net worth of $8 million. He was offering me $800,000 paid out over 5 years at $160,000 per year, 10% of his stated worth. He'd actually increased the offer from my first timeline. Maybe Jessica had told him to be more generous. Maybe his lawyers had advised it. Either way, it was still a fraction of what I was owed. I called Rothstein from the street. He upped the offer, I said. He's offering $800,000 now instead of $470,000. Still insulting, Rothstein replied. Are you ready? I'm ready. The strategy was simple but required perfect timing. I was going to accept Marcus's offer, publicly, formally, with witnesses. I was going to make him think he'd won. And then, at the last possible moment before the settlement was finalized, I was going to file a motion to set aside the agreement based on fraud and material misrepresentation of assets. But first, I needed Marcus to fully commit. I needed him so confident, so certain he'd gotten away with it, that he'd make mistakes. On November 10th, I met with Dennis Patterson, the lawyer Marcus had recommended to me. Just like in my first life, Marcus had suggested I work with Dennis because he was fair and would make sure things didn't get ugly. What Marcus meant was that Dennis would make sure I didn't get what I deserved. Mrs. Sterling, Dennis said, shaking my hand in his office, which was smaller and shabbier than Rothstein's, despite charging similar fees. I've reviewed the settlement offer from your husband's counsel. I think it's quite fair. You do? Absolutely. Given that you didn't work during most of your marriage, and considering Mr. Sterling's financial obligations, $800,000 is a generous offer. I bit my tongue. I wanted to tell him that I'd worked my ass off at Goldman Sachs, that I'd helped build Marcus's career, that I'd sacrificed my own earning potential to support his ambitions. Instead, I said, what would you recommend? I'd recommend accepting, quickly, before he changes his mind. Of course he would. I pretended to consider it. Can I think about it? Of course, but Mrs. Sterling, I'd encourage you not to wait too long. Men like your husband, they can be impulsive. If he decides he's being too generous. I understand, I said. Thank you for your advice. I left his office and immediately called Rothstein. He's pushing me to accept within the week, I said. Perfect, Rothstein replied. Let him push, but here's what you're going to do. On November 15th, I accepted Marcus's settlement offer. I signed the papers in Dennis Patterson's office, with Dennis and his paralegal as witnesses. I even cried a little, playing the part of the heartbroken wife who just wanted it to be over. Dennis had looked relieved. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Sterling. Clean break, fresh start. I hope so, I'd said. What Dennis didn't know was that I'd signed those papers with mental reservations. What he didn't know was that every word I spoke in his office was being recorded by the pen in my purse, a pen Rothstein had given me, equipped with a recording device. What he really didn't know was that in 3 weeks, I was going to file a motion that would blow the entire settlement apart. But first, Marcus needed to relax, and relax he did. The moment I accepted the settlement, Marcus changed. He became almost friendly, calling me to check in, asking how I was doing in my new apartment, offering to help me with expenses until the settlement checks started coming. It was obscene, really. His relief, his joy at having screwed me over so completely and gotten away with it. On November 20th, he invited me to lunch. I want to make sure there's no hard feelings, he said over sushi in Midtown. I know this has been difficult for both of us. It has, I agreed, but I think we can both move forward now, start new chapters. Are you seeing someone? I asked because I couldn't resist. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I am. It's new. I didn't want to tell you before. It's fine, I interrupted. I'm happy for you. The lie tasted like battery acid, but I smiled through it. You're taking this really well, Marcus said, studying me. What's the alternative? I asked. You've moved on. I need to do the same. He'd reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're going to be okay. You know that, right? The settlement, it's enough to get you started. You can go back to school, train for something new. I was a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, I'd said quietly. I don't need to train for something new. Right, but that was 15 years ago. The industry's changed. It might be hard to get back in. Marcus, I'd pulled my hand back. I appreciate your concern, but I'll figure it out. He'd looked taken aback by my tone, but he'd recovered quickly. Of course, I didn't mean to imply. I know what you meant. We'd finished lunch in uncomfortable silence. When we parted on the street, he'd hugged me and I'd let him, feeling nothing but contempt. 3 more weeks. I just had to wait 3 more weeks. On December 1st, exactly 2 weeks before the settlement was due to be finalized, I walked into Rothstein's office with Sarah Chen and Patricia Moss. It's time, I said. Rothstein smiled. Let's burn it all down. The motion we filed was 147 pages long. It detailed every hidden account, every shell company, every offshore trust. It included bank statements, emails, photographs, witness testimony from the private investigator, and a forensic analysis of Marcus's finances conducted by one of the top accountants in the country. The motion argued that Marcus had committed fraud, that he'd materially misrepresented his assets, and that the settlement I'd signed was therefore invalid. But we didn't just ask to set aside the settlement. We asked for emergency relief, immediate freezing of all Marcus's accounts pending a full discovery process. We asked for an evidentiary hearing. We asked for sanctions against Marcus and his attorneys for knowingly participating in fraud. And we filed it at 4:58 p.m. on a Friday, 2 minutes before the courthouse closed, ensuring that Marcus wouldn't see it until Monday morning. How do you think he'll react? I asked Rothstein as we left the courthouse. Poorly, Rothstein said. Very, very poorly. He was right. Marcus called me 17 times on Monday morning. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded each call to voicemail and let him leave increasingly frantic messages. Claire, what the fuck is this motion? Call me back. Claire, this is insane. You need to call your lawyer off. Claire, I swear to God, if you think you're getting more money out of me, Claire, you're making a huge mistake. The last message was different. Quieter, almost sad. I thought we'd ended this amicably. I thought you understood. Why are you doing this? I deleted it and went to meet Rothstein. The emergency hearing was scheduled for December 8th. In the week leading up to it, Marcus's lawyers filed a flurry of motions trying to get our case dismissed. They argued that I'd accepted the settlement in good faith, that I couldn't now claim fraud. They argued that our forensic analysis was based on speculation. They argued that I was bitter and vindictive and trying to punish Marcus for moving on. Rothstein dismantled every argument. Your Honor, he said in one of the preliminary hearings, Mr. Sterling's counsel would have you believe that Mrs. Sterling is simply a scorned woman seeking revenge, but the evidence tells a different story. The evidence shows a pattern of deception spanning 15 years, a systematic effort to conceal assets and defraud Mrs. Sterling of her marital rights. This isn't about bitterness, it's about justice. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, looked unimpressed with Marcus's lawyers. I've reviewed the motion and the supporting documents. The evidentiary hearing will proceed as scheduled. December 8th arrived cold and gray, the kind of New York winter day that made you want to stay in bed. I wore a navy suit, simple jewelry, minimal makeup. Rothstein had coached me. Look professional, competent, but not threatening. Look like someone who'd been underestimated. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it was packed. Marcus's lawyers had brought a small army, 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a handful of people I didn't recognize. Marcus himself sat at the defendant's table looking pale and furious. Jessica wasn't with him. Smart. Her presence would have been bad optics. When I walked in, he stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Betrayal, maybe. Shock. He genuinely hadn't expected this. Good. Judge Chen took the bench at 9 a.m. sharp. We're here for an evidentiary hearing in the matter of Sterling v. Sterling. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, Rothstein said. Your Honor, we'd like to renew our motion to dismiss. Marcus's lead attorney, a man named Richard Blackwell, began. Motion denied, Judge Chen interrupted. We're here to examine evidence. Let's examine it. Mr. Rothstein, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Claire Sterling. I'd testified before in my old life. Depositions, mostly, when I'd worked at Goldman Sachs. But this was different. This was personal. Rothstein led me through my background first. My education, my career, my relationship with Marcus. Mrs. Sterling, when did you first suspect your husband was hiding assets? I didn't suspect it during our marriage, I said. I trusted him completely. It wasn't until after we separated that I began to find irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Bank statements in the mail addressed to Marcus at our home address, but for accounts I'd never heard of. Emails from his accountant discussing asset protection strategies. References to investments in companies I didn't recognize. What did you do when you found these documents? I hired a forensic accountant, and I hired Mr. Rothstein. And what did the forensic accountant find? This was it, the moment we'd been building toward. Objection, Blackwell said, standing. Hearsay. Your Honor, I'm about to introduce the forensic accountant's report as evidence, Rothstein said. This testimony is merely foundational. Overruled. Answer the question, Mrs. Sterling. The forensic accountant found that my husband had systematically hidden assets throughout our marriage. He maintained 7 separate bank accounts I didn't know about. He'd created 3 shell LLCs to funnel investment income. He had an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands with over $15 million in it. In total, the accountant estimated his actual net worth at the time of our separation at approximately $82 million. The courtroom went silent. I saw Marcus close his eyes. And what net worth did your husband claim in the divorce filing? $8 million. So he claimed he was worth 1/10 of his actual net worth? Yes. And based on that claimed net worth, what settlement did he offer you? $800,000 paid over 5 years. Which is what percentage of his claimed net worth? 10%. And what percentage of his actual net worth? I looked at Marcus. Less than 1%. Rothstein entered the forensic accountant's report into evidence. All 200 pages of it, with appendices showing bank statements, corporate filings, and a detailed analysis of Marcus's investments. Then he called the forensic accountant herself, Dr. Rebecca Tan, who spent 2 hours explaining in excruciating detail how Marcus had hidden his wealth. It's actually quite sophisticated, Dr. Tan said at one point. Mr. Sterling used multiple layers of entities to obscure ownership. He'd invest through an LLC, which was owned by a trust, which was managed by another LLC. Following the money trail required subpoenaing records from 12 different financial institutions. In your professional opinion, was this structure created for legitimate business purposes? Rothstein asked. No. In my professional opinion, this structure was created specifically to hide assets from a potential divorce proceeding. How can you be certain? Because Mr. Sterling's communications with his accountant explicitly state that goal. In an email dated March 15th, 2021, Mr. Sterling wrote, and I quote, "I need to make sure she can't find this if things go south." Another silence, longer this time. Judge Chen leaned forward. You have evidence of this email? Yes, Your Honor, Rothstein said, introducing it as an exhibit. Marcus's lawyers had no effective cross-examination. How could they? The evidence was overwhelming. We broke for lunch at 12:30. I ate a sandwich in a conference room at Rothstein's office, trying to process what was happening. You're doing great, Rothstein said. Stay calm, stay focused. This afternoon is going to be harder. Why? Because they're going to attack your credibility. They're going to suggest you stole documents, that you invaded Marcus's privacy, that you're vindictive and manipulative. Let them, I said. I have the truth. The afternoon session started with Blackwell's cross-examination. Mrs. Sterling, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You testified that you found these alleged documents in your husband's home office, is that correct? Yes. Did you have permission to be in that office? It was my home, too. But the office was specifically your husband's workspace, was it not? Yes. And he'd asked you not to enter it without permission? He'd mentioned he preferred privacy for work, yes. So you violated his trust by entering his private workspace and going through his personal documents? I was trying to understand our financial situation. By snooping through his private papers? Objection, Rothstein said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Chen said. Mr. Blackwell, ask questions. Don't editorialize. Blackwell changed tactics. Mrs. Sterling, isn't it true that you accepted the settlement offer voluntarily? Yes. You signed the papers of your own free will? Yes. No one forced you? No one forced me. So you made a decision, and now you regret it, and you're trying to undo it by making wild accusations. No, I said calmly. I made a decision based on fraudulent information. My husband lied about his assets. He lied about his income. He lied about everything. And when I discovered the truth, I took action to correct an unjust settlement. You're claiming you didn't know about your husband's wealth during your marriage? That's correct. Mrs. Sterling, you were married for 15 years. You lived in a $4 million home. You drove luxury cars. You took expensive vacations. Are you really asking this court to believe you had no idea your husband was wealthy? I knew we were comfortable, I said. I didn't know the extent of his wealth because he deliberately hid it from me. Or perhaps you simply weren't paying attention. Objection, Rothstein said. Withdrawn, Blackwell said. Mrs. Sterling, did you hire a private investigator to follow your husband? Here it was, the affair. Yes, I said. Why? I suspected he was being unfaithful. And was he? Yes. So this is really about revenge, isn't it? You're angry he left you for another woman, and you're using this court to punish him. I looked at Blackwell for a long moment. Then I looked at Marcus. I'm not here for revenge, I said quietly. I'm here because I spent 15 years of my life supporting a man who lied to me, cheated on me, and then tried to cheat me out of what I'm legally entitled to. I'm here because I deserve better than 1% of what we built together. And I'm here because if I don't fight for myself, no one else will. The courtroom was silent. No further questions, Blackwell said. Rothstein called Sarah Chen, the private investigator, next. She testified about the affair, showing photos of Marcus and Jessica entering the apartment together, leaving together, kissing in public. How long did you observe Mr. Sterling and Miss Chen together? Rothstein asked. Over 3 months, I documented 37 instances of them meeting, including 14 instances of them entering the apartment on East 72nd Street together. The apartment Mr. Sterling rented under his cousin's name? Yes. And during this time, Mr. Sterling was still married to Mrs. Sterling? Yes. And he was telling Mrs. Sterling he was working late or traveling for business? According to the records Mrs. Sterling provided, yes. Blackwell's cross-examination was brief. Miss Chen, did you observe any illegal activity? Yay. No. So Mr. Sterling was having an affair. That's not a crime. It's relevant to the question of Mr. Sterling's credibility and character, Rothstein interjected. We'll let the judge decide relevance, Blackwell said. No further questions. The hearing continued for 3 days. Rothstein called Marcus's accountant, who testified, reluctantly under subpoena, about the asset protection strategies he'd helped Marcus implement. He called the managers of 2 of Marcus's shell companies, who admitted they existed primarily to hold investments and distribute income to Marcus. He introduced emails, bank statements, corporate filings, and testimony from a forensic computer expert who'd recovered deleted emails from Marcus's computer. Emails Marcus's lawyers had failed to produce in discovery. Every piece of evidence built the same picture. Marcus had spent years systematically hiding wealth, lying to me and preparing for a divorce where he could walk away with nearly everything. By the 3rd day, even Judge Chen looked disgusted. Marcus finally took the stand on the afternoon of December 10th. Watching Marcus testify was surreal. This was the man I'd loved, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd built a life with. And he was lying through his teeth. Mr. Sterling, Rothstein began, you testified in your divorce filing that your net worth was approximately $8 million. Is that correct? Yes, Marcus said. And you stand by that testimony? Nay, I do. So the offshore trust in the Cayman Islands with $15 million in it, that doesn't count toward your net worth? That trust is for estate planning purposes. It's not accessible to me. You're the sole beneficiary of the trust. But I can't access the funds until certain conditions are met. What conditions? I don't recall the specific terms. You don't recall the terms of a $15 million trust you created? It's complicated. I'm sure it is. What about the LLC registered in Delaware, Sterling Capital Holdings? You own that entity, correct? Yes. And it holds approximately $22 million in investment assets? I'd have to check with my accountant. We have the documents, Mr. Sterling. $22 million. That's not part of your net worth either. The LLC is a separate legal entity that you own. Yes, but... So you own an entity worth $22 million, but you don't consider that part of your net worth? Marcus's lawyer objected. Your Honor, this is badgering. Overruled, Judge Chen said. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. The LLC's assets are reinvested, Marcus said. They're not liquid. So if I subpoenaed the LLC's bank account and found $3 million in cash sitting there, that wouldn't be liquid? Marcus went pale. I don't know the current balance. We do, Rothstein said, introducing another document. As of last week, the LLC had $3.2 million in cash reserves. Would you like to revise your testimony about liquidity? It went on like that for hours. Rothstein systematically dismantled every lie, every half-truth, every attempt Marcus made to minimize his wealth. By the time Blackwell stood up for redirect, Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. So, Mr. Sterling, Blackwell said, regardless of the technical ownership structure of these assets, you offered your wife $800,000 in the settlement. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. Would you say that was a generous offer? I thought it was fair, Marcus said. And you had no obligation to offer her anything at all, correct? Objection, Rothstein said. That's not how marital property works in New York. Sustained. Withdrawn, Blackwell said. Mr. Sterling, did you love your wife during your marriage? It was a cheap move, trying to humanize Marcus, but I held my breath waiting for his answer. Yes, Marcus said, I did. Did you intend to hurt her with the settlement offer? No. I thought it was fair based on our circumstances. No further questions. Rothstein stood for recross. Mr. Sterling, you testified you loved your wife. When did you stop loving her? I don't know. It wasn't a specific moment. Was it before or after you started sleeping with Jessica Chen? Objection! Blackwell was on his feet. I'll allow it, Judge Chen said. Marcus looked trapped. It's complicated. Let me make it simple, Rothstein said. You started sleeping with Miss Chen in late April of this year, correct? I don't remember the exact date. But it was before you asked your wife for a separation in September? Yes. So you were cheating on her while still living with her, still sharing a bed with her, still allowing her to believe your marriage was intact. I didn't want to hurt her. But you did hurt her, and then you offered her 1% of your actual net worth and told her it was fair. No further questions, Your Honor. Closing arguments happened on December 11th. Blackwell went first, arguing that I was a gold digger who'd accepted a settlement and now wanted more, that the forensic evidence was circumstantial, that Marcus had every right to structure his finances as he saw fit. Never. Mrs. Sterling knew what she was getting into when she married a venture capitalist, Blackwell said. She knew the lifestyle. She enjoyed the benefits. And when the marriage ended, she accepted a settlement that would have set her up comfortably for life. But that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted revenge. And she's using this court to get it. Rothstein's closing was devastatingly simple. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. Mr. Sterling lied. He lied about his assets. He lied about his income. He lied about his investments. And he did it deliberately, systematically, with the help of his accountant and his lawyers, in order to cheat his wife out of what she's legally entitled to. The evidence is overwhelming. The documents don't lie. The bank records don't lie. The emails don't lie. The only person lying here is Marcus Sterling. Mrs. Sterling isn't asking for revenge. She's asking for justice. She's asking for what's hers, and she deserves to get it. Judge Chen didn't deliberate long. "I've reviewed the evidence," she said, "and I've listened to the testimony. Mr. Sterling, I find your testimony not credible. I find that you deliberately misrepresented your assets in your divorce filing, and that you did so with the intent to defraud Mrs. Sterling. I'm setting aside the settlement agreement. I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of all your assets, including the offshore trusts, the LLCs, and any other entities you control. I'm freezing your accounts pending the outcome of that accounting, and I'm awarding Mrs. Sterling interim support of $50,000 per month until we determine the appropriate division of marital assets." Marcus went white. $50,000 a month? That's less than you're currently spending on your girlfriend's apartment, Mr. Sterling. I suggest you find a way to manage. The full accounting took 3 months. During that time, Marcus's life fell apart in spectacular fashion. The investor lawsuit, the one Patricia Moss had filed, moved forward using the evidence uncovered in our divorce. Marcus was forced to settle for $18 million. Jessica left him in January, right around the time his legal bills hit $2 million. His firm asked him to take a leave of absence after the scandal became public. And me? I thrived. I got a job, first as a consultant for a boutique investment firm, then as a senior analyst at a mid-sized hedge fund. Turns out, 15 years away from Wall Street didn't matter when you could prove you'd basically been running your ex-husband's finances without credit. The final settlement hearing was on March 15th, 2024. Dr. Tan had completed her accounting. Marcus's total net worth was $87 million, even after the investor settlement and legal fees. Under New York law, as the non-moneyed spouse in a 15-year marriage where I'd sacrificed my career to support his, I was entitled to an equitable distribution. Rothstein argued for 50%. Blackwell argued for 20%. Judge Chen awarded me 45%, $39.15 million, plus the $4 million house, plus retroactive spousal support, plus attorney's fees. In total, I walked away with just over $43 million. Marcus's initial offer had been $800,000. I'd accepted it. Let him think he'd won. And then my lawyer had tripled it. Well, more than tripled it. About 53 times it, if we're being precise. On the day the settlement was finalized, I went back to the cafe where Marcus had asked me for a divorce. I ordered the same lunch I'd had that day, a tuna sandwich and iced tea, and I sat at the same table. My phone rang. It was Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello? Claire." His voice was hoarse, defeated. "I just want you to know, I underestimated you. I thought you were stupid," I supplied. "Weak? Too in love to fight back?" "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught, you're sorry you lost, but you're not sorry for what you did to me." Silence. "For what it's worth," I said, "I did love you. Once. But you killed that love slowly, deliberately, every time you lied to me, every time you cheated, every time you made me feel small. And when you offered me that settlement, when you thought you could buy me off for a fraction of what I deserved, that's when I knew I had to destroy you." "You did," he said quietly. "You destroyed me." "No," I corrected, "you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." I hung up. I never saw Marcus again after that. I heard he moved to California, tried to start over. Last I checked, he was working as a mid-level partner at a small VC firm, making a fraction of what he used to make. Jessica married someone else, someone richer. As for me, I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn. I started mentoring young women in finance, teaching them how to protect themselves, how to understand their worth, how to never let anyone make them feel small. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my beautiful home with my beautiful life, I think about that moment in April 2023 when I woke up and realized I'd been given a second chance. I think about how easily I could have made different choices. I could have confronted Marcus about the affair, tried to save the marriage, ended up right back where I'd been in my first life. But I didn't. I chose revenge. I chose justice. I chose myself, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because the truth is, the best revenge isn't living well. It's taking everything they thought they'd keep.